So if you're a moral relativist, there cannot be a problem of evil. If there's a problem of evil, then moral relativism is false. But you can't have them both. And that's what this person was trying to do. This person had views that were in sibling rivalry. They were fighting with each other. They had to sacrifice their relativism, or they can sacrifice their complaint about evil, but they couldn't hold them both. And one thing you'll find is a lot of people, they wanted their way at one time and then the opposite way at another time. They just don't want to be consistent. And it's appropriate for us to hold their, in a sense, intellectual feet to the fire and have them be honest about this, okay? So that's a type of a sibling rivalry. Richard Dawkins is a famous example of this, where as an evolutionist, he, in other writings, mentions this. He doesn't believe in objective morality, yet when it comes to the God of the Bible, he's got this tirade in one of his books against the God of the Bible, as being a terrible God and a wicked God is his point. Well, look at those things are in rivalry here. One last example here. I was lecturing at USC Law School once, and a law student came up to me, and she said, well, I'm an atheist, and I'm an animal rights activist. Okay? And I told her, well, I think you're going to have trouble trying to make sense out of those two terms in the same sentence. And she didn't understand why. She said, well, I believe that animals have a right not to suffer. And I said, and I believe that I have a right to half of your income for my organization. And, she blinked a couple of times, and I said, what's the difference between our two statements? You made up a right regarding animals, and I made up a right regarding, money I should get from her. Okay, rights aren't the kind of thing that you can make up, not real rights, not rights that have any weight to them. Rights are given by God. And if there is no God to give rights, then all we're doing is expressing our preferences. So you can't demand rights for animals as a transcendent obligation upon human beings if there isn't a transcendent lawmaker that makes sense of those rights to begin with. You see, she had never really thought about it. She was a USC law student, but hadn't thought about the connectedness of these particular things, rights and the God who gives rights, okay? And so consequently, her challenges, or her point of view, general point of view, suffered in virtue of sibling rivalry. So I first, in our conversation, asked her, what is a right? A right is a just claim to something, a just claim to something. It is not just a claim to something. It is appropriate, just, moral claim to something. And then I asked her, how could there be such a thing as animal rights or any rights if there is no God? That was the line of questioning that I've offered. So always be alert for arguments or views that self-destruct. If you can see them, they're easy to deal with because they destroy themselves. You just have to point it out. You ask your own self the question, does the position being offered also argue against itself? And when you discover that your friend's view is self-refuting, then you can just ask a question that exploits the problem and then let him sink his own ship, all right? So here's what we covered in this particular session. We learned the nature of a self-refuting claim, views that commit suicide. Suicidal views express contradictory concepts. The contradiction is built into the notion, and therefore they're dead on arrival. I mean, they commit hara-kiri. They don't need any help from you except that you just simply point that out. The second thing that we learned is how to recognize when someone's view self-destructs. And we talked about identifying the basic premise or the conviction or the claim. It's not always obvious, so we got to do some thinking here. We have to second ask, does the claim apply to itself? And finally, you have to ask yourself, does the claim self-refute? Okay? And after we laid that out, we looked at some popular examples of self-refuting claims, and then ended with a little talk about the sibling rivalry suicide, the concept that two points of view held by the same person are in conflict with each other. And that at least allows you to get rid of one of those. Homework for this time. I think what I'd like you to do is just be alert this week to points of view that self-destruct, okay? Be prepared if you're in a group to share those things with some of the people in the group. But take an active stance to be alert for things that may be at odds with itself and use the steps that I described. Next time we get together, we'll talk about another way that arguments go bad. I call that way taking the roof off, and we'll describe that tactic next time we're together. See you then.